In this episode of the Shining a Light on Workplace Bullying podcast, we are talking to Ming Eve. Ming describes herself as a curious belly dancing scientific geek, a poet, regulatory strategist, and coach. She is passionate about enabling a different kind of leadership in the biotech industry in order to improve the health and well-being of humankind. Over the past 25 years, Ming has helped various companies develop highly innovative drugs in areas of increasing uncertainty and complexity. She has witnessed firsthand how people and leadership issues often derail the development of promising drugs at the expense of both patients and companies. Ming now exclusively works with innovative, purpose-led biotech startups through her consulting and leadership coaching company, Smarter Biotech Solutions, helping them start up on the right track by taking an integrated approach covering both strategy, mindset, and organizational structure.
Welcome everyone to our next episode, Shining a Light on Workplace Bullying. Today we have Ming with us. Welcome Ming and welcome Norun. We will be listening to you, Ming, about your experience, what is your experience with workplace bullying? What did you learn out of it? How it has shaped you? You have been working in the life science industry for many years with different nationalities, different cultures. So we are here today to learn from your experiences and to listen to your stories. So the stage is yours, Ming. Please share a little bit about yourself. And we are very interested into your stories.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I just wanted to say thank you to both of you, Nora and Nylam, for inviting me, because it really made me reflect on my career in this context and also about my own behaviour, which I'll get onto later. And also it is a pet subject of mine because it's been in and out of my life a lot throughout my career. And actually at one point I thought it was my purpose and I abandoned it because I felt I was just daunted by how big it was. So I'm really happy that you're both moving things forward in this realm, and I'm happy to be part of it. So thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. So just quickly about myself, as Ina mentioned, I've been in life sciences for over 25 years. And what's always interested me is working in lots of different types of environments and with people the whole time. And the nature of my work is such that I cannot do anything without the help of a team, without people. And it's for me, it's always about the people. So and that's also why it led me into being really interested in coaching to the point where I've studied it. So I am a qualified coach, and I find that the whole, if you like, the messiness of us being human just makes, any project super interesting. And yeah, and really that's what I've observed, that in the process of helping companies develop drugs, very often it's people and leadership issues that get in the way. And that's why I've set up my own business to basically tackle the strategy, but also that aspect, so that more promising drugs come through. So that in a snapshot is about me. Yeah, and just about the whole topic about bullying, I guess where do I start? I suppose if I go back to, I know Ilham and I, we've had previous conversations about it, and how we know it happens, but yet there's a lot of hiding the head in the sand or denial that it's going on, particularly by organisations or by other individuals. And over here in the UK, there's a third-party organisation that helps with remediation and things like that, and it's called ACAS. And actually they had a paper where they did a research in 2015, and they actually said that bully-related absenteeism has an impact on turnover and productivity, because based in 2007, it was estimated that it cost about £13.75 billion, with a 1.5% reduction in overall UK productivity. And actually that equated to 17.65 billion impact on the UK GDP. So if those figures don't already persuade people that there's a really big issue that we need to address, then I don't know what does. And obviously there's the whole human impact about bullying. So there are already really good reasons why we need to address that. But yeah, in terms of my own experience, I've been bullied twice. But again, it was only in preparing for talking to you both today that actually I realised that right at the beginning of my career, my very first job, I was bullied, but I didn't realise why until, yeah, just like a few days ago. And I think it's because I wasn't really clear on the definition, apart from being at a very early stage in my career. And I think what's interesting is, again, in that paper that I referred to, broadly we know that bullying can be when someone's being intimidating, offensive, threatening, etc., etc. But when they wrote that paper, they found that there was some survey data, and actually as a result of that, they widened the definition to cover ill treatment, interpersonal conflict, unacceptable, non-wanted behaviours. So that's a hell of a lot of stuff that can be brought in. And then I guess it might be subjective depending on the people involved. So that might explain also why I didn't realise that my very first job that happened, because I was undermined, and actually I was moved across into another department, into another team within the same function that actually I had no desire to be in, because it just wasn't something that I was interested in. But it meant that I was safely out of the way of the person who felt, for whatever reason, they felt, well, I do know why actually, even though they never told me, they felt threatened by my performance at work, because I had just, I was a fresh graduate, I was eager beaver. And yeah, I know now when I look back on it, they felt threatened. And it wasn't that I was being threatening, it was just my presence and how I was working was threatening. And that's the thing, actually, that's the common theme, is that the other bullies I've encountered, that it's all coming from fear. And actually, even the subsequent ones, in my case, it's always involved the person who's bullied me, but there's always been another bully behind them. So it's like there's a higher level bully, if you like, and then there's a lower level, or a more direct, an indirect and a direct bully, I guess would be the better way of describing it. And so it makes me wonder that maybe, if I use the psychodynamic term of transference and countertransference, or if you think about it in terms of like energy, you might, this might be where the indirect bully, I don't know, maybe for all I know, is they're bullying my direct bully, who's then passing it on to me. And I say that, and I don't mean this as a disrespect to the direct bully, but as a observation, I feel that direct bully was actually a weak person. So it's not meant as a judgment, it's just as an observation. And I think that then increased the likelihood of them, you know, kind of like passing on the behavior, which also was to the benefit of the indirect bully, because then they were able to control me, but also that person. So that's why I think, you know, the more I think about bullying, the more complex it is. It's not yeah, it's a fascinating subject, one could say. And yeah, so there's that example. And then also what I've encountered is, I'm not being a direct recipient of it, but I've been caught up like a piggy in the middle, if you know that term. So I've been caught up in upward bullying. I didn't know there was a term for it until I did a bit of research for this. So upward bullying, I think, is very not often discussed. Usually it's more focused on someone in a higher level of power, you know, mistreating or bullying somebody in a more junior position, but not the other way around. And the other way around is what upward bullying is. And actually, from being piggy in the middle and also hearing other people's experiences of what they've encountered, I think it's also something that happens a lot that not many people talk about. Maybe because actually they don't realize it's happening. And or maybe I don't know, maybe there's kind of some kind of loss of face, because it's like, well, I'm the senior person, surely I should be able to manage that. And very often what I see, one very common cause of it is when two people go for the same more senior role, and one of them gets it and the other one doesn't. And they can either both be internal candidates going for that role, or it could be an internal person and an external person coming in. And then the internal person, that example, doesn't get it. And then there's this passive aggression, this resentment boiling up. And then it kind of seeps out as, you know, being defensive, being totally unhelpful, trying to basically undermine the person who's now their boss, who maybe before was their peer if it was an internal colleague. So I see that, I do hear about that, and I have, like I said, been caught up in the middle. And as me being caught up in the middle, I felt so uncomfortable, because I could see what was going on, and I was actually really embarrassed to be associated with the person who was doing the upward bullying, because I was worried that other people were going to think, oh, is Ming like her? And I felt really conflicted, because I felt like I couldn't speak, because I was reporting into this person. So, and it was going against how I personally would treat other people. And I didn't feel I could say anything to go to this person. You know, when you did that, or you said it like that, I'm not really I had to just stay quiet. And then I couldn't even talk to her boss or my boss's boss, because I couldn't be going against my manager. So I felt really awkward. And so I think also there's always this focus on who's the bully and who's being bullied, but no consideration about, well, actually, what's the wider effect on everybody else? And if I think about, you know, the other two examples where I was directly bullied, well, particularly in the first one, I didn't even know when it started that it was happening. Like, there were some things that were being done for example, people being asked not to come to the meetings that I'd set up. I didn't even know that until obviously there was no one there. And I had to cancel my meetings, and people were then in private telling me that they'd been told not to come to my meetings. And so, you know, like what kind of signal does that send to people if they're being asked to behave in that way, and how does that make them feel? I think, you know, the word that's surfacing for me is awkward, you know, and it puts them in a really difficult position. And at the time I didn't really understand it, because I guess I don't have the level of maturity and experience that I do now as I did then. And, you know, the one thing is, unfortunately, most of the time when you're the one who's being bullied, yeah, unfortunately you are alone, because even if your colleagues might privately agree with you that something's wrong, you can't rely on them to speak up. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because they've got their own jobs, their own livelihoods, their own families to think about supporting. And like somebody said to me once, everyone has their price. And the thing that's different about me is I have always prided myself on being financially independent, and therefore I choose where I go. And I have, you know, I have a price like everybody else does. And I guess it's my go, no go. And I will, not that I always get it right, but, you know, my price is just different to everybody else's. And I guess it's just something to be aware of, to not expect that your colleagues will stick up for you, because they have to. It is, unfortunately, everybody has to look out for themselves. So that's one thing. And I think also in terms of the bullies, they're very much operating out of fear and insecurity. And the hardest thing is for the person who's being bullied to not take it personally. That's what I've learned, because even when it's being done to you, it's not about you, which sounds crazy. It's the bully is being triggered. It's like, however you're being, and it might not even be you, but it just so happens, even just you turning up might be something that is making them unconsciously remember something from the past that caused them a lot of difficulty and unease and unhappiness, whatever that was. And it can be personal life as well as professional life. But that's what they're reacting to, a story about that, their own story about that. And the thing is, you can choose. You actually have the power, even if you don't think you do have the power. You have the power to decide, do I want to get sucked into their story, or do I go, no, actually that's their stuff, it's not me, it's got nothing to do with me. And that's, I think, the very first step to actually like, I think just splitting yourself off from them and actually making sure that you're okay. It all comes back to, you know, clarifying what's theirs, what's mine, and not getting the two confused.
How can you do that? Because there's thanks, Ming. This is a lot of experiences that you're sharing, which is very valuable, and I'm sure, you know, our listeners will think, oh yes, this is also something that I have experienced. Yes, this is also, I didn't know that this was bullying, and now I understand. And also the whole dynamic of workplace bullying, that there's also someone eventually invisible behind the bully, right, as you shared. But I mean, the bullying, you know, being bullied is kind of a negative experience, but it's a kind of a journey. And you mentioned that, you know, one key element is not to take it personally. But how can we, right? What can we do, and how did you do not to take it personally. Is there a way you want to share with our audience? How did you achieve that, and how can we all achieve that?
So I'm going to say, it was a great question. I'm going to say the first, well, it's the second time, because I thought it was the first time, right? But it's obviously the second time I got bullied. Because the first time was completely, like I said, I didn't realize until a few days ago. But the second time it happened, I wasn't really aware. It was only, I think, the third time I could see that actually the way that the person was communicating was the same pattern with everybody else, with a lot of other people. So actually that made me feel better because I wasn't being singled out. So the key is just watch the person, see what kind of patterns of communication and behavior do they do, because we're all creatures of habit, me included. So just spot what the pattern is, and then just be curious about it, and then see, well, okay, what part of that pattern are they doing with me? Because once you figure out what that pattern is, then then you're on the way to realizing actually it's not about me, it's just the habit. And maybe part of that noticing might be, oh, when I do this, or when I say this, or when this one of my other colleagues does this, or says that, they do this. So it might also be observing it like that. So basically it's like they're a lab rat, right? And you're just observing them. That's all you need to do, and just see what happens. That's all I would say, Ireland. I think key thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It is a challenging journey, right? It is a challenging experience, and painful, as you also mentioned. It is a lot of times you feel alone because you don't get the support, and you should not kind of expect, because everyone has his or her own journey and reasons why they cannot, even though they want to be involved and to support you. But I know it from myself, and Noreen, you're from your own experience. It's a very painful experience, right? I mean, most of the time it ends with development of negative mental health outcomes, like anxiety, stress, depression, burnout, or even in some cases it can go up to committing suicide, right? And here I think what you're sharing, to learn to observe very early on, right, if I understand you correctly, the behaviors of the person, of the bully, and the communication, and try to find ways not to personalize it, and try to build a safety distance, or become more resilient, and emotionally build a kind of a detachment from that situation. That's really helpful. So Noreen, any questions from your side at the moment to Ming?
Yeah, I think it's one point that you've touched on, which I think is really important as well, is how this whole thing, normally it's a systemic issue. So you have everybody getting caught up in this, whether you are being bullied or you're the one in the middle seeing it, and everybody are kind of paralyzed and don't know. And everybody on one hand has to look after themselves because they know it's going to have consequences for me if I get involved. And I think that is really a super important point about the whole bullying thing. And I mean, it's so hard to solve that, right? So I don't know, do you, Ming, have any thoughts on how that can be dealt with in organizations?
$1 million question. I think it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, because at the moment the onus seems to be always on the individual who's being bullied to tackle it alone, and is clearly not working. So I think what the organisation can do is, it's not enough just to have processes in place, because every place that I've been in, they've had processes, and have I ever used them? No, I haven't, because I haven't felt safe enough to use them, that I would be heard. And I know that ultimately, and I don't mean this out of disrespect to HR, but I know that ultimately HR are there to support senior leaders. I think what HR and indeed the organisation they could do is, number one, and it goes right from the board, right, all the way down. So I'm not even just stopping at a CEO, board level downwards. Be really clear on what your values are. Because often loads of companies have way too many, and it's so confusing. Number two, be really clear about what expected behaviours you want to see, because again, that very often is neglected. Number three, make sure that you hire people who embody those behaviours and values, because if you don't, you're already on the losing streak. Number four, make sure they're enforced. And I don't mean like you're in a prison, but you know, like the people that you hire in have got to role model those, because otherwise how can you expect the rest of the organisation to get it, to follow you? Because they won't. And also you've got to encourage that through your performance reviews. It takes time, but it's worth doing it. And then in terms of it's not just about processes, because more often than not they're just lip service. It's like, have a bit more thought about, how am I going to create the right environment where everybody feels okay to have conversations especially when we have conflict. How can we talk about things in a way where people feel safe to express what they truly want to say, as opposed to, oh, I'll just shut up and I'll just, I'll just put my head down and get on with it. And I think the onus is on the leaders, because they're in positions of power to add to that safety environment. And again, I'm going to include the board in that, because if the board aren't making the CEO feel safe, then the CEO is not going to be doing it, and ergo it cascades down. So yes, Noreen, it's a whole systemic thing. The other thing is, again, probably because of my coaching background, but one thing I absolutely love about coaching is the fact that there's so much focus on communication. And it's not just talking, as we three of us know, it's also about active listening and feedback. And I would love it if more organisations spent the time training on this, but particularly on feedback, because giving and receiving feedback is a real art. And it's not just confined to performance review, it's constantly every day. And that's what I think would also, just general communication, feedback, active listening, they're things that I think companies need to be honing on. And actually, at the end of the day, when you're recruiting at a senior level, really, you want to be recruiting in emotionally intelligent leaders. That's what you need to be doing. And I've had instances where the focus has been more on the recruiting for qualifications, and that just, I know from my experience, it does not work at all, because that was how my last case of bullying came about. Actually, they were recruited in, I think it clearly wasn't based on the emotional intelligence, and they were repeating a pattern. I could see just from LinkedIn and how often they've been at each company, but they came in, and I know it's a very common thing in companies, but they came in, cleared out all the original staff, like the senior people, including myself, brought in all their people, and actually there was like one person who'd moved with them, the same company 4 times. And to me, that was a clear sign that it was their security blanket, because it helped them feel safe. But in doing that, the company lost all that original knowledge that's really precious in some really, it was a really competitive environment, and it caused major setbacks to the project, to the point where the asset lost out to the competitors and it got shelved. And indirectly, I don't have any actual statistics to link it, but I know from my experience, because I know exactly what went on, at least from my perspective, that was one of the reasons that contributed to over a 70% drop in share price, because the people bit went totally wrong. So yeah, that is why I think the organization has got their part to play. How can they make sure that everyone's going to be fairly heard, and that actually they're there to they're not just there for the leadership, they're actually there for everybody, to bring people together, to encourage that frank conversation in a really safe space, and also to be aware that it's fear triggering fear with more fear, and that becomes your company culture. And also to I think for the organization to understand that sometimes when people are operating out of fear, just to be aware that might actually be going back to some trauma in their lives, and sometimes it can be really significant personal trauma, and that is what is going on.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching base on so many different points at so many different levels, right? I mean, it all starts with the caring and supporting company culture where every individual feels safe. But how often do we face companies who say, oh, we have everything in place, we have the policies, regulation in place, we have the training in place, all the leaders have been trained on emotional intelligence, but then still you see all this bullying happening, people moving into long-term sick leave, then they leave the company, you know, the reputation decreases or gets the damage. So, but still companies saying, oh, we have everything in place, so this is not happening, because also the terminology workplace bullying is something that I think the companies don't want to hear so much, want to give attention so much. So, and we had also, you know, one of the head of talent developers in one of our podcasts. He gave also very insightful tips and tricks how at that level, on board level and leadership level, you should change the company organization. But from an individual perspective, you know, Ming, you mentioned that with your first experience, you didn't realize it until a couple of days ago that this was bullying. But you gave these examples of like people were told off to go to your meetings, right? You were sitting in a meeting that you had organized and people were not there, and people were coming in private to you to share with you that they were told off, right? So this is one example that I am hearing a lot of times from people that I'm supporting that are being bullied. I'm sure Norun as well. So there are tons of other examples. So in that situation, and you mentioned we need to work on our emotional well-being and then our own emotional status, that we don't take it too personally. But how can we not take that personally, right? Because I mean, you have spent a lot of time and energy preparing a meeting, and there's one guy or one woman, and this also happens like that. Women are bullying, not only men, right? So coming back to that, how can we not take it personally, but also what can we do? What did you do in that situation? How did you overcome that?
I think, to be honest, at that time, I wasn't as emotionally mature or as well equipped as I am now. And I think that, but I think actually one thing that I did decide, because that wasn't the only thing that happened to me, There are parts of my job were being taken away, which I now can understand is constructive dismissal. But again, whether you go down that route or not, that's really tricky. But anyway, so my instinct was, I want to leave. I want to leave this job. But it was taking quite a while to find the right job. And then part of me was thinking, uh-oh, if I leave, what happens if the same thing happens again? Then what? And actually, I then thought, well, if that were the case, I'm the common denominator here. And what if I'm in my own little cage and I've just moved my cage somewhere else, but I'm still in that cage and I'm looking through the bars of my cage thinking that I'm free, but I'm still in my cage. And that was when I decided that I was going to find a coach, because I wanted to break free of that cage. And secondly, I felt so alone. I just wanted somebody to be there for me, because even my family, I didn't talk that much to them because I was such a workaholic. I was just burying myself to because I still wanted to make a good impression. I just wanted to escape it. But they didn't understand. They thought that I was being, what was the word? My words are not coming to my head right now, but, I was being unreasonable. Like even my own family were thinking that about me. And I wasn't sleeping, So I hired a coach, and I think that, yes, I'm really lucky that I could afford to do that. But I think that if you can, it is the best money well spent, because you need to have a tailored approach to support you going through something like that. And there were a few times, I really remember we were in the middle, I worked with them for a whole year, one-to-one. And there was a time when I remember I nearly had a mental breakdown, because I remember being at my desk and I felt like my brain was going to crack. And luckily I had a couple of colleagues that I could also speak to. But I remember actually phoning up my coach and saying to her, I feel like I'm going paranoid. Am I going paranoid? And she went, well, the very fact that you're asking me the question means that you're not. So having someone who you can say anything to in private is the best thing you can do. And also, I think following since then, and having trained as a coach, there are loads of really great coaching tools out there. And this is what a coach can teach you as a way of helping to manage yourself. And I know as well, for example, I've trained with an organisation called the One of Many, and I know that they have like a monthly membership, and they have programs where they also try and teach. It's more geared towards women, but I'm sure there's loads of others out there where you can just, go to these group coaching programs and they'll teach you how to manage yourself. But the bonus is when you have that one-to-one support, you can also talk to them. So that's what I would say that's what helped me, Item.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I have another question, but Noreen, if you have a question to me,
no,
please
go
ahead. So coming back to your statement saying that when you were first bullied, the person was threatened about you, right? Because you had, you were there, a fresh person with a lot of knowledge and experience. And this is also something that I'm hearing a lot of times from people who have gone through the bullying experience. And including myself, my managers felt threatened by me for many different reasons. Either you have their knowledge, you're too shiny, you're too connected, whatever. You're always too in their perception, right? So how is there a way to not to become a threat for the bullies? and is there a way to have a collaborative partnership, you know, a collaboration? And if so, how can we do that?
Right. So firstly, don't ever make yourself small to make somebody else feel better. It's their stuff, it's not yours. You just carry on. You just carry on being the great person that you are. But what you can also do is, you know, just think about it as, this is just helping me to learn more things about myself, about my management, my leadership style. So what can I learn from this situation? Which I know is probably the last thing you're thinking of, but it was what helped me get through it. The most recent time I got bullied, it was almost, it's really funny, it was almost like nearly a same, not quite the same, but similar to the second time. So I took it as, oh, actually, this is a test. This is just testing me. How much have I learned and grown since the first time? And what is there left that I haven't quite mastered, that I need, that now it's just making me mop up the learning that I just need to finish up. And that's what helped me. So yeah, I think that was one thing. But sorry, could you repeat your question again?
So the question is, I think the first part you already answered, you know, what can we do not to become a, you know, threatening. So we should not, we are who we are, right? And the second part was, part of the question was like, how can we build a collaboration with this bully, right? Is there a way? Should we? And if yes, is there a way? What is the way? How can we collaborate to win the person for us? Or
I'm going to go back to, and it's a very, I guess it's a Buddhist concept, is bringing compassion, which means kindness. It's bringing kindness to that person and yourself and anybody else is getting caught up in it, which I know sounds really weird, but that's the best thing that you can do. Because actually, that person who's bullying you, as much as you're hurting from their actions, they're also hurting in some way, and they're not able to manage whatever the pain is that they're going through. And unfortunately, they're taking it out on other people, and you just happen to be there. And so the best thing that they need, as well as you, is kindness. And someone has to make that first move. So why not you?
That's such a great piece of advice. One thing that I feel like I learned in my bullying experience as well was this, like, how do you forgive in practice? How does it actually work? And because I remember also thinking in those ways when I was in my experience, and my way was to look beyond their behavior and see their drama in behind, and it's the understanding. And so I love what you're bringing up there. It's really about building that awareness within ourselves, to extend our awareness to understand the bigger picture of what's really going on in the situation. And another thing that comes up for me as well when you said this, because as you've been saying as well, it's really about fear, which trigger more fear, and we have like a hierarchy of fear, right, in companies. And I've learned that actually you have the two opposites, right? You have love and you have fear, or you can call it compassion and fear. And when we have these so-called opposites, there is actually just one of them that exists. Because fear in itself does not exist. Fear is just the absence of love and compassion. So when you bring, I think that's such a wise advice that you bring in there, to somebody needs to start bringing that fear and compassion into the equation instead of just taking it out. But it's very hard, and it's very very high level self-awareness, I think, to get to the point where you're able to do that.
And I love what you said about the F word, forgiveness, which actually is a really good indicator of how deep your level of kindness and compassion is. And yeah, Nora, and I completely agree. You know, it's taken me a really long time to get to this point after 3 rounds of being bullied, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody else, but that's just, you know, how my journey's been. And actually, you know, that's why I said thank you to both of you, because it was one of many things that actually you made me realize, and actually you two are responsible for what I did last week on LinkedIn. I ended up doing, for the first time ever, doing videos on LinkedIn, because you got me to think about, oh yeah, I remember I have a blacklist of people. Like, everyone can have a personal and a professional blacklist, and I have way more people on my professional blacklist, and they're people I have personal grudges against, and they include the bullies. And that was when I was just like, how long have I been hanging on to these people on my blacklist? And so because of this podcast, I ended up posting a video every day and publicly committing to myself that I was going to work through this process of letting my blacklist go, which culminated in me writing a letter to them. And I think I had about 14 people and a company, but I had about 6 buddies on there. And I had to write a letter to them saying thank you for what they taught me, or how they had contributed to my success, because where I'm now, I'm a lot better off than where I was then. So I thought, well, actually, haven't they contributed to that in some way? So the very act of, like, you know, it was like writing Christmas cards, but obviously I wouldn't be writing these people Christmas cards, but, you know, thanking them. And the funny thing is, the more I was writing, like, the easier it was getting. And then I always made sure I had to end the letter by wishing them well, whatever, you know, wherever they were going in their life. And then I burnt the letters, and I think exactly like you just said, Nora, and, you know, it's about how can I make peace with this, or whatever that means for each person. How can I make peace with it all? Because it's not about letting them off the hook. It's letting yourself off the hook, so that you don't have to hang on to this, that it doesn't have to hold you back, and that you come out the other end so much wiser for it, and actually with way more, you know, with a lot of kindness in your heart for everybody, including yourself. Yeah, so I really loved you picked on that word, Nora. And I think also, just going back to the definition I said at the beginning, and how there was this piece of research in the UK, and how they broadened the definition to cover, you know, interpersonal conflict, unacceptable, unwanted behaviours. And they also have said that bullying can be a one-off incident or repeated. And that's why it also made me think about myself. Have I ever been a bully? As much as I hate that word, have I ever done that? And unfortunately, my confession here, my first time ever confession is, and maybe I'll be your first ever bully on this show, I have on 2 occasions, yeah, maybe been a bully. I'm not very proud of it, which is why I'm making this face. Because it was arising out of conflict. In the first instance, I wasn't aware of what I was doing. I wasn't aware that I was hounding the person, because I was so focused on getting this project done, and we were just at loggerheads, and I just wanted to move the project on. But I was so fixed in what I want, how I wanted it to happen, And it only got raised to me because the person involved was a consultant, and luckily there was none of this power dynamic that you get with an internal colleague, and they raised it, and I was mortified because they said, I'm thinking about leaving, and I was just shocked at how I had behaved like that. And thank God the person was very gracious to accept my apology. And the other person was a direct report. And basically I didn't get the person hired in at the more senior level that I wanted. And then it turned out that their capability wasn't at the level that I thought I was going to get. And that's not, and that's, I don't mean that disrespectfully to them. That's just a statement of fact. And basically I got frustrated because now I was having more work on my plate, even though I had somebody there. And unfortunately, I said something which was upsetting to them, but I didn't know that at the time. I only found out later through another colleague, and then we talked, and then the person, my direct report, and we talked it out at the time. But it's only, again, preparing for today, that I went back to that and I thought, oh, I was in a higher position here. Did I inadvertently bully her? And I thought, well, maybe. So we hadn't spoken in years, and actually yesterday I sent them a text message and I said, I'm being interviewed for this podcast. It's making me reflect on things. I'm now wondering whether I might have bullied you, and I'm really sorry. I know I apologized then, but I'm apologizing now, and I'm really, really sorry. Please, can you help share anything? What were the specific things that I did that upset you? Because this is something I want to learn. And we actually had a conversation about it yesterday, and yeah, and they said, I'm not hung up on it. I knew we'd sorted it out. And afterwards, my boyfriend said, oh, why did you pick it up again if you'd already sorted it out? And I said, well, the difference is this time I have a much higher level of awareness. I had no inkling. It hadn't crossed my mind whether it was a bully or not. Now I'm thinking maybe. And so I'm apologizing from that level. And that's very different. So I think this is where the onus is not just on the person who's being, the onus is on all of us. Doesn't matter what position we are in. We all need to hold ourselves to account and reflect on, have there been times when, okay, I might have been bullied, but also have there been other times when I might have accidentally done that? Because I genuinely believe that underneath it all, we do all operate with good intentions, just sometimes we just go a bit wrong. And that's where the kindness comes into ourselves. And I really, like you two, I really want to move this conversation on. So I really hope that by me coming clean, and I do feel a bit vulnerable, and it is a bit edgy for me to go, do you know what, I think I've done it twice. I really hope that it's going to encourage others to, to look at themselves, because this is the only way we are going to change things, change company culture.
Yeah, I think that's such an important, thank you for sharing that. That is such an amazing confession, and also makes all of us just think a little bit further. One thing is that we get more awareness, we understand what happened to us when we did get bullied, and we learn from that. But it's also so important that all of us also think about, with that new awareness, oh, might there have been situations where I was the bully? And I think many of us can probably relate to that. You're certainly not the only one. I can also think of situations where I would have also acted in a way which I am not proud of anymore. And, you know, and it's not an excuse, but it's again also part of this systemic, what the example that you brought, it is systemic in the sense that, you know, you were so overloaded with work as well, or you had to perform, or like, so there's also an element of that, although that should not be our excuse. But again, you have these hierarchies where there seems to be almost like a bully culture, and then even if people are good intentions and are not naturally born bullies, they end up actually acting like that as well. And that was, I had another interview with Janice Harper, who wrote a book about mobbing becoming a group aggression, where she talked about that, exactly how actually good people turn into being bullies. So yeah, no, that's such an important point. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Ming. It means a lot to us, and I think also to our audience, to reflect back, right? I mean, to reflect back on our own stories of being bullied, but also eventually whether we were the bullies, right? Whether we bullied consciously or subconsciously somehow someone. Yeah, I think there's a story when I was a child. I think I was bullying another girl. Yeah, now that you talk, I never thought of it, but it was, I think, when it was bullying. And I think I should also go and say, look, I'm sorry for that, because I'm still in contact with her and we never spoke about it. But I know how much how difficult it was for her at that time, me bullying her. I think we were like 8 or 9. But this is, I mean, it helps to become more self-confident and also self-aware, right? The better we are with our self-awareness, the better we can deal with it. And I also remember this example of me, you know, when you mentioned about you and Noren about forgiving, right? When I was bullied, or after I got sick for 2.5 years, I was away from work, and I had nightmares. Right, I couldn't sleep, but then when I slept, I had nightmares, walking through the corridors of the company, my manager hunting me, you know, running after me. And since then, I didn't put a step into that company, into that building. And guess what? In about 10 days, I will be there, as I have been invited as a speaker. So, and when I got that invitation, I was like, wow, the circle is now closing, right? It's like, now I'm over it. I had a conversation years back with my manager who had bullied me. He told me what was the reason, exactly like your reason. He felt threatened, and I had forgiven him. And now I have the opportunity to go back and talk and in that company. So no nightmares any longer. So it's like, it's such a relief, right? And like your story and like Noren's story, it helped me also to grow and to develop and become more self-aware about also my behavior, communication. And I think this is also something we really want to share here with our podcast, to bring actually to, you know, to shine a light. What is workplace bullying? How is it happening? What are the consequences? But how does it help us also to grow and become, you know, a different or a better version of ourselves, and how we can also, with our experience, help others. You know, you became a coach, Noren is a coach, I am a coach. We give back, right? We share our stories and we give back. Yeah. So anything to add here from your side, Ming, that we haven't touched base yet?
Yeah, just going back to the point about not taking it personally, I also apply that to HR, right? HR are just there doing their job. Don't take it personally, whatever they're doing. And I say that because in the last time I was bullied, so both the second and third time, I ended up losing my job as a result of being bullied. And actually the last time I complained about what happened, and then it was weird, then I suddenly found myself losing my job. And I actually had a sense that when I disclosed, because I had to go through redundancy consultation, that I'd been bullied, and suddenly now I was finding out I was losing my job, and I could actually see the look of shock on their face. So I knew it was nothing to do with them. And some months later, after it all had finished, it all ended, I actually saw them and I went up to them, and I didn't go into detail about what happened, but I said, thank you for helping to manage the process. I really appreciated what you were doing. And I appreciate that you were in a difficult position, but you were doing your job. So thank you. And that was it. And yeah, I think that's my point. It's another thing. It's really hard not to take it personally, because I know that in the beginning, the second time I felt it was, but sometimes they might be doing things that they don't agree with. It doesn't make them a bad person. It's just a job. And that's the thing. It's finding a way how you can manage your own emotions. How can you find a way to feel? It's important to feel your feelings, because in feeling your feelings, you let that pass through. And I know you had a guest who talked about the link with the body, and I'm a firm believer in that, because if you don't allow yourself to feel your feelings, they get stuck in your body, and as well, it gets you into this mind chatter, which is really not helpful. And so allow yourself to feel the feelings in a really safe, supported space, process them in whatever way works for you. But then at the same time, when you're in this situation at work, try to be objective as possible and just think, this is business. Because if you go with that line and you don't get drawn into whatever their emotional stuff is, like the fear, then you're already going to be in a much better place.
Ming, you are just such a treasure trail of insights. I think we have to have you on a second time at some point. We've been going for an hour now, so I think we should get towards rounding off. Is there something you would like to add at the end, or how can people follow you and your work on this topic?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm in the middle of setting up my website, so it will be up once it's done, but it'll be through my LinkedIn profile. But yeah, they can follow me there, and I talk about various things, including things around leadership, and yeah. And otherwise, I encourage everybody to listen to this podcast. Especially when you are feeling alone, that there are people such as you two, or all the other guests you have, or myself, and and just to reach out and know that you're not alone, whatever side of the table you're on.
Definitely, we're not alone, and this is also why we are here, right? Thanks a lot, Ming. It was really pleasure. I learned a lot already from you, and let's continue the conversation, and having a second podcast with you, that would be great. I think there's so much we can learn from you for the both sides, right? Thanks a lot, and thanks, Norun.